Do you still remember Boney M? In the late 1970s, they ruled dance floors around the world with glitter, confidence, and timeless hits like Daddy Cool, Rasputin, and Mary's Boy Child. But fast forward to 2026, the reality is far darker than anyone ever imagined. After the band fell apart, its members faced shattered marriages, silent disappearances, and deaths that raised unsettling questions. And once you see how they've changed, you'll never hear those songs the same way again. Liz Mitchell as lead vocalist of Boney M. Liz Mitchell was born on July 12, 1952 in Clarendon Parish, Jamaica. At 24 years old, she joined Boney M in 1976 and became the group's lead vocalist, the only consistent real voice behind its recordings. Her vocals gave emotional gravity and credibility to songs like Rivers of Babylon and Daddy Cool. That strength on record did not appear by accident. Born into a poor family, Liz spent much of her childhood under the care of her grandmother, while her parents worked away from home to survive. That separation created a lingering sense of emotional distance and self-reliance, forcing her to grow inward and disciplined at a young age. Music did not enter her life as a dream, but as something she clung to quietly. When her family emigrated to Harlesden, London in 1963, the pressure intensified. The immigrant neighborhood was overcrowded and under-resourced, and racial hostility was an everyday reality. Liz has spoken about feeling isolated and constantly aware of being different, which fed deep insecurity but also hardened her resolve. She learned early that survival required effort, restraint, and emotional endurance. These experiences pushed her toward music with a seriousness that set her apart. Auditioning for Hair and later relocating to Germany, she immersed herself in demanding stage work and relentless rehearsal schedules. Replacing Donna Summer in the Berlin production placed her under scrutiny, and her time with the Les Humphreys Singers ended in disappointment after a poor Eurovision result. Rather than breaking her, these setbacks taught her how to absorb failure without collapse. That resilience was tested again when Frank Farian recruited her in 1976. Boney M's rapid rise brought global fame, but also relentless pressure. While albums such as Take the Heat Off Me and Night Flight to Venus sold millions, Liz carried the weight of being the real vocal foundation in a group often criticized for lip-syncing. The imbalance between image and labor created quiet tension, leaving her emotionally exhausted by the time the group disbanded in 1986. Solo projects like No One Will Force You and Let It Be reflected a woman trying to reclaim ownership of her voice in an industry that had consumed it. As the spotlight shifted, stability had to come from elsewhere. Liz's marriage to Thomas Pemberton brought stability, but it was not untouched by hardship. Long tours and extended separations placed stress on family life, forcing difficult compromises between career and home. Building Dove House Studios together in 1996 became an act of survival. Physically, the cost of fame lingered. Decades of intense touring left Liz battling chronic exhaustion, insomnia, and stress-related health issues, conditions she has acknowledged publicly. These struggles pushed her toward faith as structure. It helped her slow down without abandoning music altogether. Today, Liz Mitchell is 74 years old and continues to perform worldwide as Boney M, featuring Liz Mitchell. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, earned through decades of touring and royalties, she lives not as a relic of disco, but as a survivor of it. Her story is not about excess or collapse, but about endurance, the quiet strength required to keep standing when the spotlight finally moves on. Marcia Barrett as vocalist of Boney M. Marcia Barrett was born on October 14, 1948, in St. Catherine Parish, Jamaica. At 27 years old, she joined Boney M in 1975 as a vocalist, contributing harmonies and select lead performances that expanded the group's emotional range. Her voice, most clearly felt on Belfast and We Kill the World, added gravity beneath the glossy disco exterior, giving the music a seriousness that often went unrecognized. That seriousness did not come from the studio. It came from early life. Raised in poverty, Marcia learned endurance as a daily requirement, not a choice. Money was scarce, expectations were heavy, and emotional reassurance was limited. When her family moved to Croydon, England, the upheaval brought new pressures, forcing her to adapt quickly and suppress vulnerability just to keep moving forward. Those pressures carried her into adulthood and into music with a work ethic shaped by survival. Relocating to Germany in the late 1960s opened doors but offered little security. Constant touring across Europe demanded stamina, discipline, and emotional restraint. Signing with Metronome Records and performing night after night built experience, yet the instability of the circuit taught her how easily momentum could vanish. By the time she entered Boney M., Marcia understood the cost of visibility. Fame arrived fast as albums like Love for Sale and Night Flight to Venus climbed charts, but it was accompanied by creative limitations and disputes over real vocal credit. The group's public image often overshadowed the labor behind the sound, leaving her navigating a system that valued spectacle over voice. When Boney M collapsed in the late 1980s, the silence was abrupt, and solo efforts such as Survival and Come Into My Life moved forward without the industry support she once assumed would be there. As professional certainty eroded, personal life became a refuge. Her marriage to Marcus James offered emotional grounding during years defined by instability. Yet even this stability was fragile, tested by financial strain and the psychological toll of a career that had risen and fallen too quickly. The partnership endured, but it carried the weight of constant adjustment. In 1990, Marcia's life shifted decisively when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Treatment was grueling, recovery uncertain, and recurrences forced long periods away from work. Plans stalled, income shrank, and the body imposed limits she could not negotiate. Music became something she approached cautiously, measured against fatigue, pain, and the need to heal. Now, Marcia Barrett is 78 years old, living quietly in Berlin after largely stepping away from public performance. With an estimated net worth of around $2 million, drawn from Boney M royalties and her memoir, Forward, My Life With and Without Boney M, her legacy rests on endurance rather than excess. Her voice carried more than melodies. It carried years of pressure, persistence, and survival that were rarely acknowledged while the lights were on. Maisie Williams, as dancer and vocalist of Boney M. Maisie Ursula Williams was born on March 25, 1951, in Montserrat, British Caribbean. At 24 years old, she joined Boney M in 1975 as a dancer and live vocalist, becoming a vital visual and emotional anchor of the group. Her presence helped transform Boney M from a studio concept into a believable, charismatic act on stage, even as her recorded vocals remained largely absent from the records. Her emotional resilience was shaped early. Growing up in Montserrat before moving to Birmingham, England, Maisie faced the double burden of poverty and racial hostility as a black immigrant teenager. The transition was harsh and isolating, forcing her to mature quickly. A deeply personal wound followed when her brother dismissed her singing voice as terrible, a comment that lingered for years and quietly redirected her ambitions away from music and toward modeling. That redirection opened doors, but not without sacrifice. Modeling offered visibility and control she lacked elsewhere, culminating in her winning Miss Black Beautiful in 1973. Encouraged by this success, she fronted the band Black Beautiful People, slowly rebuilding confidence in performance. Yet music remained a fragile space for her, something approached carefully, guarded by past humiliation. Opportunity arrived unexpectedly in Germany. While working as a model in West Germany, Maisie was approached about joining a new pop project. What followed was relentless touring, television appearances, and sudden global fame. Within Boney M, she performed live on songs like Sunny and Daddy Cool, anchoring concerts with physical energy and authenticity, even as studio recordings relied on other voices. The imbalance between visibility and recognition became a quiet but constant strain. As the years passed, That strain turned into conflict. While Boney M dominated the charts with albums like Night Flight to Venus and Oceans of Fantasy, Maisie struggled with the reality that her contributions were minimized on record. After the group's collapse, she rebuilt from scratch, forming Boney M featuring Maisie Williams, releasing Call Upon Jesus, 2006, and her own remix of Sunny, 2007, and reclaiming songs that had once excluded her. Her collaboration with Mellow M on Daddy Cool reached #1 in Latvia, proving her staying power. Her personal life offered steadiness where the industry did not. Maisie has long shared her life with a long-term partner based in London, a relationship defined by privacy rather than publicity. While the partnership provided emotional grounding, the prolonged legal battle against Frank Farian, culminating in her 2009 court victory, securing her share of Boney M royalties, took a heavy psychological toll, reopening years of professional hurt. Today, Maisie Williams is 75 years old, still touring selectively and performing under her own name with quiet determination. With an estimated net worth of around $2 million, earned through touring, royalties, and legal restitution, her story is not one of scandal or excess, but of persistence. She stands today as a woman who stayed visible when her voice was sidelined and who ultimately reclaimed both her place and her dignity on her own terms. Bobby Farrell as dancer and frontman of Boney M. Bobby Farrell was born on October 6, 1949 in San Nicolas, Aruba. At 26 years old, he joined Boney M in 1975 as the group's dancer and frontman, becoming its most explosive on-stage presence. His wild movement, theatrical energy, and iconic performances, especially on Rasputin, turned Boney M into a visual phenomenon that could not be ignored. That intensity was shaped early by instability. Bobby grew up in Aruba in a household marked by absence after his father died when he was still young. With little structure or guidance, he left school at just 15 and went to sea as a sailor, drifting between ports and countries. The constant movement brought freedom, but also loneliness, poverty, and a growing sense of dislocation that followed him into adulthood. Europe promised opportunity, but delivered struggle. After stops in Norway and the Netherlands, Bobby survived on sporadic DJ work, often living day to day without security. Those years hardened him and sharpened his instinct to perform, to command attention physically when words or credentials were lacking. By the time he arrived in Germany, performance had become his identity. His discovery by Frank Farian changed everything overnight. With Boney M, Bobby became the sole male figure on stage, a focal point for cameras and crowds. Yet behind the success lay conflict. His lack of studio vocals became public knowledge, and clashes with Farian over control and respect led to his exit in 1981. Attempts at a solo career failed, forcing a humbling return in 1984 before the group's final split in 1986. Touring later as Bobby Farrell's Boney M, he kept the music alive but often struggled financially, at times relying on social assistance despite global fame. Bobby's personal life mirrored this instability. In 1981, he married Jasmina Shaban, and together they had 2 children, a daughter Zanilia and a son Zanin. The marriage began during the height of his fame, but deteriorated under the strain of constant touring, financial uncertainty, and emotional distance. The couple separated in 1995, leaving deep wounds that affected both his family life and sense of belonging. Health problems quietly compounded his difficulties. For years, Bobby suffered from cardiovascular issues, including chest pain and breathing difficulties that worsened with age and relentless touring. Despite his energetic stage persona, his body was failing him, a reality he struggled to accept as performances remained his primary source of income. On December 30th, 2010, Bobby Farrell died at the age of 61 in a hotel room in St. Petersburg, Russia, from heart failure, just hours after performing on stage. He was found unresponsive after missing a wake-up call, having complained of chest pain and breathing problems the night before. In an eerie coincidence, he died in the same city and on the same date as Grigory Rasputin, the historical figure immortalized in Boney M's most famous song. Bobby Farrell was laid to rest at Zorgvlad Cemetery in Amsterdam, closing the life of a man whose estimated $4 million net worth came not from comfort, but from relentless motion, dancing until his heart could no longer keep pace. Frank Farian as producer and songwriter of Boney M. Frank Farian was born on July 18, 1941, in Köln, Germany. At 34 years old, he founded Boney M. in 1975, quietly becoming its hidden male lead vocalist and creative architect. His songwriting and production shaped global hits like Daddy Cool, Rivers of Babylon, and Rasputin, redefining how pop music could be manufactured, marketed, and sold at scale. The instincts that drove Farian were forged in hardship. His father was killed in World War II before he was born, leaving his mother to raise 3 children alone in post-war poverty. The absence of a father and the constant pressure to survive created a deep need for control and self-reliance. Trained initially as a cook, Farian turned to rock and roll not out of rebellion but out of hunger, for recognition, escape, and a future larger than circumstance. Early attempts at music brought frustration more than success. His first band failed, singles disappeared without impact, and years passed without validation. Yet those disappointments sharpened his understanding of the industry's mechanics. By the mid-1970s, he had learned that songs mattered, but image, timing, and illusion mattered just as much. Boney M became his breakthrough, followed by solo success with Rocky, 1976, which confirmed his instincts as both storyteller and producer. That same formula later fueled his greatest triumph and his deepest scandal. With Milli Vanilli, Farian repeated the model: session singers behind the scenes, attractive performers in front. But the collapse was catastrophic. When the lip-syncing was exposed, the group's 1990 Grammy Award was revoked, lawsuits flooded in, and Farian became the industry's most controversial figure. The scandal strained his reputation, but never erased his influence. He continued producing successful acts like La Bouche and No Mercy, quietly rebuilding while carrying the weight of public blame. His private life remained deliberately guarded. Farian never married, but he shared a long-term relationship of nearly 20 years with Chinya Onyewenjo, with whom he had 3 daughters and 1 son. The relationship was stable but complex, shaped by his relentless work habits and emotional distance. They separated in 2008, and while there was no public hostility, the split marked a quieter, more isolated chapter in his life. Health problems increasingly defined his final years. In 2022, Farian underwent major heart surgery, receiving a replacement valve that briefly extended his life. Pulmonary complications followed, forcing him to rely on a wheelchair and breathing assistance. Despite physical decline, those close to him noted that he continued working in his studio, unwilling to separate identity from creation. Sadly, Frank Farian died on January 23, 2024, in Miami, at the age of 82, from complications related to heart and lung disease. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth stood at around $40 million, built from the sale of more than 800 million records worldwide. He was not buried in spectacle, but remembered as a man who worked behind the curtain, one who changed pop music forever, even as he forced the world to question the price of illusion. Reggie Tseboy as vocalist of Boney M. Reggie Tseboy was born on September 7, 1950, in Ghana, before later settling between Africa and the United Kingdom. In 1982, at 32 years old, he joined Boney M as the official replacement for Bobby Farrell, following Farrell's explosive conflict with producer Frank Farian. His arrival subtly altered the group's identity, introducing genuine male vocals at a time when authenticity had become an unspoken weakness in the Boney M brand. Long before disco fame, Tseboy's life had already been shaped by performance and expectation. In Ghana, he was a recognizable film actor, gaining popularity through socially grounded cinema such as Love Brewed in the African Pot. That early success carried pressure of its own. He was seen as a cultural figure, not merely an entertainer. Moving between continents meant constant reinvention, cultural displacement, and the emotional strain of leaving behind recognition in one world to start over in another. Music eventually became his bridge forward. During the 1970s, Tsiboe joined the group Sugarcane, achieving international exposure with their 1978 hit Montego Bay. Touring Europe demanded endurance and discipline, but it also trained him for the relentless pace of the disco industry. By the time Boney M came calling, he was no stranger to studio work, live audiences, or the fragile nature of commercial success. Inside Boney M, however, the challenge was uniquely psychological. Tsiboe sang lead on numerous tracks: Kalimba de Luna, Happy Song, Going Back West, Young, Free and Single, and multiple Christmas recordings, appearing prominently on albums such as 10,000 Light Years and I Dance. Yet no matter how strong his vocals were, he stood in the shadow of Bobby Farrell's wild physical charisma. The situation reached its breaking point in 1984, when Farrell returned and Boney M briefly expanded into a 5-member lineup. Tsiboe remained professional, but the dynamic made his position increasingly fragile. After the group's official split in 1986 and a short-lived reunion with Liz Mitchell in 1989 to 1990 that produced the single Stories, Tsiboe chose distance over prolonged instability. He returned to acting, later appearing in British television productions including Doctor Who, seeking creative control that pop stardom had denied him. Today, Reggie Tsiboe is 76 years old. He lives a largely private life, no longer chasing the spotlight, occasionally engaging with acting, cultural events, and legacy appearances tied to African and European arts. His estimated net worth is around $2 million, drawn from music royalties, acting work, and decades of professional performance. His story remains one of quiet resilience. Sheila Bonnick, as early vocalist of Boney M. Sheila Bonnick was born in Jamaica in the 1950s and moved to England at the age of 3, growing up between two cultures that quietly shaped her artistic identity. In late 1974, at 24 years old, she was recruited by Boney M producer Frank Farian as one of the very first female faces of the project that would soon dominate disco. Unlike those who followed, Sheila entered with a clear understanding that she was joining as a real singer, not simply a visual performer. That conviction was rooted in her upbringing. Raised by a mother who worked as both a teacher and seamstress, and a father who was a shoemaker, Sheila grew up in a household defined by discipline, craftsmanship, and independence. Creativity was encouraged, but self-sufficiency was essential. Before music, she modeled, worked as a secretary at a prestigious law firm, and later took a position at EMI Records, quietly learning how the industry functioned behind closed doors. Her path shifted decisively in the early 1970s when she moved to Hanover, Germany, responding to a dance contract advertised in The Stage. There, alongside her close friend Maisie Williams, she auditioned for Frank Farian. She appeared in several early live performances during Boney M's experimental phase, but the illusion quickly fractured. Farian's model relied on lip-syncing, strict image control, and anonymous studio vocals. Faced with the reality that her voice would not truly be heard, Sheila made a defining choice. Rather than accept a role limited to choreography and appearance, she walked away. It was a quiet but costly decision. By leaving before Boney M became a finished product, her contribution was almost entirely written out of the group's official history. Still, her career did not disappear. It simply moved off the main stage. Sheila signed a solo deal with Hansa International, recording tracks such as Proud Mary under the name Sheila Bonnick, and later collaborated with the Munich disco project Mandrake. Her voice also appeared on the soundtrack of the German film A Woman in Flames, 1983, allowing her to work on her own terms, less famous but undeniably authentic. Now, Sheila Bonnick is 74 years old. She remains creatively active, selectively touring with her Sounds of Boney M show, running her fashion line, writing, and working as a holistic practitioner. Based primarily in London, with time spent in Spain, her estimated net worth is modest but stable, built from decades of independent work rather than mass exploitation. In the history of Boney M, Shayla Bonnick stands apart, not as a forgotten footnote, but as a rare example of someone who chose ownership of her voice over global fame. Looking back from 2026, the story of Boney M feels far more fractured than the polished disco fantasy the world once saw. Liz Mitchell became the voice that carried the brand into old age. Marsha Barrett survived fame only to face illness and long periods of silence. Maisie Williams kept the name alive on stage, even while fighting for recognition behind the scenes. Bobby Farrell burned brightest and paid the heaviest price. Others, like Reggie Thibault and Shayla Bonnick, passed through briefly, leaving real contributions that history almost erased. By 2026, the cast of Boney M no longer represents a single story, but a collection of consequences, of choices made under pressure, of contracts signed too young, and of dreams reshaped by reality. Some found peace outside the spotlight. Others stayed on stage because it was the only place that still felt like home. Which Boney M story stayed with you the longest? Did any of these changes surprise you more than you expected? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more untold stories behind music legends, subscribe and stay with us. Because the truth behind the hits is often louder than the music itself.